Yeah, so we got a mailbag. This is right after the Red River shootout.
Okay.
I get a text from a friend of ours. A friend of mine is becoming a friend of yours. He's very active in our Twitter sphere. He says you guys should do a mailbag on what OU would look like in the SEC this year. If they
Okay.
were in the SEC this year, what would they look like? So this is what I did. I start thinking about it. I start pondering on it. So Trey, this is what I actually did, so that way I can give an accurate depiction of what I think would happen. I
Okay.
went with a team I'm familiar with in the SEC. I took Arkansas schedule,
Okay.
and I put Oklahoma, OU, and Arkansas spot. So I'm gonna go down the games.
Okay.
Rice, I think it's a win. Texas, I guess I just have to say it's a win because of yesterday, but I
Yeah.
think that's a toss up. It can go either way, right? So let's just say I give them the win. They're 2-0. Georgia Southern 3-0. A&M, I believe they lose. So now they're
Mm.
3-1. Georgia, I believe they lose. Now I think
Yeah.
they're 3-2. Ole Miss, I believe they lose. Now I believe they're 3-3. Now you're going against Auburn. Toss up. So I'll give you that. You're 4-3. Then University of Arkansas Pine Bluff, I'll give you that. They're 5-3. Mississippi State, it's a toss up. So let me just be nice. I'll give you that. You're 6-3. LSU, I think you lose. Defensively, I don't think they
Depends
can
on
keep
what
up.
LSU team shows up this year, man.
So I'll give LSU that game though, just off of athletes. Period. Defense.
Yeah, right.
Period. So you're 6-4. Alabama, I don't think they're beating Bama ever. 6-5, and then Mizzou, which is the SEC. I'll be generous and I'll give them that. So 7, right? And there's a couple games in that 7 that I think are toss ups. I don't necessarily know if you really do beat Texas. I'm just giving you that because you won yesterday. I don't necessarily know if you can go and beat Auburn, which Auburn has proven they're not afraid to go on the road against a big team. They went to Happy Valley this year. So even though that would have been a home game at OU, and so I'm like, realistically, I think the best they do is 7-5. I think the worst they can do, they're not bowl eligible in the SEC, because this is how I feel about OU. I feel OU has benefited from playing in a weak conference for the last, can we say, 2 decades? 2 decades. Texas has kind of been the only thing that kind of kept them afloat in the early 2000s that made it worth watching before. Oh, then they had, Nebraska.
The Baylor
good.
years.
Yeah, the Baylor
had
years.
some Baylor years with the Art Briles. Yep.
Right. So,
the
here and there.
TCU.
The TCU. But it's never been like a strong, consistent, like the SEC is strong and consistent. And I know a lot of people want to say this. They would say the Big Ten hasn't been, and I'm like, the Big Ten's been strong and consistent. Ohio State has just been at another level, so it's made it look like the Big Ten hasn't been at. But if you look over the last 2 decades, man, the Big Ten has had some solid teams. Even you got to look at the D'Antonio years. You got to look when James Franklin instantly came over and turned over Penn State. You have to look, man. Iowa has always been Iowa. They're a tough win. Pat Fitzgerald has had Northwestern play good on the other side of it. So Michigan's we've not always been the best, but we're gonna give you a solid. We had the 2016 year where we were undefeated. There's going into the Iowa game. So there's been this era where in these other major, we don't even talk about the Pac-12 here, but these other, between the SEC and the Big Ten, which I think we agree are the 2 best football conferences, there's just this strength of the conference. I don't think OU is ready for the week in and week out gauntlet of the SEC. That is to win, and I think this is why we love to see Bama lose, because they're so dominant in the best football conference in the country. And it's the SEC is I'm looking at you guys' schedule as a Razorback fan. I'm like, you guys play A&M. Then you had to turn around and play Georgia. Then you have to turn around and play Ole Miss. And then I'm looking at your schedule. You still got to play Auburn. You still got LSU. You still got
Bama.
Like those 7 games alone. No other conference, even as a Big Ten fan, is giving a team that type of tough slate where you are like, those are 7 games potentially I'm going to lose in the season. And then you guys added on the out of conference game with Texas. And we could say, I'm not going to discredit, because Sark looks like he kind of has this thing rolling a little bit, and he'll get it there. I just don't. I think OU is in for a rude awakening. Now, maybe after some recruiting years, it helps out. But I think their first couple years are probably going to be a little bit rough. And if they play this year with the team we've seen, with the quarterback, I mean, they just switched the quarterback. That they have a quarterback controversy now. But with Spencer Rattler there, and I like Spencer, I want the kid to succeed. You know, we're all here we want athletes to do well. And what we've seen, I might say this Oklahoma team maybe wins 4 games in the SEC this year.
Wow. Ooh. Okay.
They're not that good.
I've got a little bit different take on this. Even though it's funny because I actually followed pretty much the same format as you. I didn't necessarily go game for game. Now, to be fair to OU for the sake of this argument, you did pick the team, Arkansas, who coming into the season had the toughest schedule in all of college football.
Okay.
For the second year in a row. Because I feel like if you put OU in Kentucky's schedule, if you put OU in Ole Miss's schedule, in some of these teams that don't have, like, not everyone has to play Georgia as their crossover game along with the SEC West gauntlet. I talked about that last week, how Ole Miss, like, this game against Arkansas for both teams could have New Year's 6 implications. And I gave Ole Miss the advantage because, one, they don't have to play Georgia as their crossover. They've got Vanderbilt and they've got Bama behind them early. So here's my take, though, getting back to OU. So we talked about the Sports Illustrated thing, right? So I essentially, I don't know if you can see all the helmets behind me, but I cover Arkansas, A&M, and Texas. And so I had Arkansas Ole Miss on my big screen, and I had the Red River, I'm used to saying Red River Shootout because that's what it was when I was growing up. Then they changed it to the Red River Rivalry, and then that's too difficult to say. So then now it's the Red River Showdown. But whatever we want to call it now.
It's the shootout to me always.
I had that on my second screen, and watching OU and Ole Miss at the same time, I saw a lot of similarities. And so I started thinking, when you texted me that question, I feel like you could watch what Ole Miss does this year. Because you could make an argument that Ole Miss could potentially run the table, as much as it pains me to say this a day after losing to them in a heartbreaker. But just getting back to that realistic, objective stance, they could potentially run the table and be back in the Sugar Bowl or whatever in the New Year's 6. Or they could drop a couple more and then still be, I think, in a New Year's Day bowl, whether it be like the Tax Slayer, the Outback, whatever.
Right.
You know what I'm talking about. One of those where they'll probably draw like a quality Big Ten opponent. Like, I think the table is set for them to really perform well, with their ceiling being, a New Year's 6. Well, I got another thought on that a little bit later as far as the SEC West. Okay. But the New Year's 6, and then really, I think their floor at this point is still just a New Year's Day bowl, which I know those games aren't what they used to be because players don't really play in them. They start preparing for the draft, and it's just but to get back to the mailbag question, I feel like you could watch what Ole Miss does, how their season plays out, and I think you could make an argument that OU would do the same thing if they were in the SEC this year. I think you could also say put them on Kentucky's schedule, and I don't know that they beat Florida, but I think they could achieve similar success to what I believe Kentucky could achieve. I also think that we talked about this in, I think, our week 0, maybe the one after. It's all going to be about how they pod the SEC when Texas and OU comes over. But if we're just talking right now this year, which is what the question was referring to, I really think that, and all this is specific to OU's quarterback change, because that's when I really started having kind of this revelation, because that guy reminded me of Ole Miss's quarterback a little bit. I'm not saying his name, but the quarterback from Ole Miss.
Right.
So he kind of reminds me of that. And then if you just want me to button this segment with a hot take, don't be shocked if Spencer Rattler plays for Ole Miss next year and Lane Kiffin turns him around.
That wouldn't be shocking at all. I think
thought about that yesterday.
That would be okay. And I know we're about to transition,
I know.
but I pulled up Ole Miss's schedule, right? So you start talking about that, and you made the comparison. So I'm looking at it, right? Just for our listeners who aren't watching, you have Louisville. I think OU can take that. Austin PA, they can take that. Tulane. I mean, they almost lost to Tulane, but they won, so I'll give them that. So they're 3-0. Going into Bama, you lose to Bama, that's 3-1. I believe they lose to you guys in Arkansas. We're 3-2,
and that's fair. But it can't, like, even Ole Miss. It came down to the final play of the game,
right? But
you know what I mean.
I see what you're saying, but this is what I'm saying. You guys, I think sometimes we get spoiled with the SEC about how great the athletes and the teams are in there. Like,
sure.
You build your team in the SEC to compete against SEC talent. So we could say, man, Ole Miss put up 52 points on Arkansas. Most teams in the country aren't going to put 52 points up on Arkansas or 51 points up on Ole Miss. Those are SEC built teams. Like, I feel like when you play in the SEC, you just kind of give into the fact that, man, this is high-powered offense. We're building bend, don't break defenses with a ton of athletes out there, and we're going to go athlete on athlete. And we're going to try to figure this thing out. I just don't think OU has built that type of talent on defense. I think offense, they can compete.
I was going to say offense.
Yeah, offense, I think they're fine. I think defense, though, it will just be terrible for them. So I'm maybe I just don't. And I'm going to be honest, I don't like OU fans. Every time they don't say anything until the game's over. That's what annoys me about them. Like, they're quiet all game, and then after the game they're on Twitter, and I'm like, be quiet, talk your junk before and just face up to it. So I don't know, I'm looking at them in Ole Miss's schedule right now. If they were Ole Miss, and I'm still like, maybe you go 8-4, maybe you go 7-5. I'm never sold on them. I just always feel like they get the benefit of the doubt because they're playing a weak conference. They're going to go undefeated 9 times out of 10, and but I think good thing is we're about to find out within the next couple of years.
But to that point, let me pull this up real quick. I mean, Ole Miss still has to play LSU, who I know has not been well this year, but they're just a team that, like, any given week they could decide to show up. They've got Auburn, they've got A&M. Like, those aren't just checkbox wins like you may have thought they were a week ago. And so, to your
to
point,
play Tennessee next week, bro. Josh,
who's looking good?
They let Tennessee looking good. So
Heupel, the OU boy. But, like, I guess what I'm saying is I don't disagree with that last point you just made, because my thing is I think let's watch how Ole Miss's season plays out, and that's what I think OU could accomplish.
Got you.
Because OU could go 8-4. They could. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Yesterday was just a weird matchup, and what I really don't understand is you got Lebby and Briles, who essentially run the same thing. They have a foundation of the Baylor veer and shoot with Lane Kiffin wrinkles, right? Because Kendall Briles learned all those wrinkles when he worked for him at Florida Atlantic. And so how are the defensive coordinators still, like, seemingly that unprepared? Like, you run against this all spring, all summer, all fall. Like, what?
This is what you see.
Anyways,
every day.
So, and that's for both sides. And it's two, in my opinion, really good coordinators in Barry Odom and DJ Durkin. Because he was at Michigan, right?
Yeah, DJ was, and then he went to Maryland.
Anyways,
and then